Glory to Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters, this is the Eparchy of Phoenix's class on the life and legacy of Blessed Theodore Romzha. Tonight's presenter will be Father Chris Zugger from our parish in Albuquerque. Father, would you go ahead and begin us with a prayer, please?
In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, everywhere present and filling all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain and save our souls, O gracious one. Okay, glory to Jesus Christ, and thank you for plugging in tonight. I understand we have a full house, which means over 200 computers, and that's why we're taking questions in a written form. There's no way we can handle dialogue tonight. And what you're looking at now is an icon of Blessed Theodore Romzha in the seminary chapel in Uzhhorod, Ukraine. Uzhhorod is the capital of the Transcarpathian district of Ukraine. It's just a few miles from the Slovak border. And since 1771, it has been the seat of the Greek Catholic bishop of the Eparchy of Mukachevo. I first read about Blessed Theodore when I was 13 years old. My mother's parents were Roman Catholic. I was raised Roman Catholic. And my father is Roman Catholic. My mother's parents had a very good Catholic library where I read about the Eastern Catholic churches. And Donald Atwater's book on martyrs had a chapter on Bishop Theodore Romzha. And it was published just a couple of years after his assassination. And in the book was a photograph of Bishop Theodore, a close-up of his face, and it just struck me and so profoundly. And I was already looking for the Byzantine Catholic Church, but after reading about Romzha and his dedication to the church under such tremendous pressure, I was hooked on him, and he has been one of my spiritual heroes ever since. For a little bit of terms, I said Greek Catholic. He is and was considered Greek Catholic. The Eastern Church in Europe that follows the Byzantine Rite is known there as Greek Catholic because the Byzantine Rite is called the Greek Rite. And so they don't say Byzantine. We say that in the United States because we did not want to be called Greek Catholic anymore. People thought we were Greek Orthodox. So I'm going to use the Greek Catholic throughout tonight in my talk. Blessed Theodore began his life, like all of us do, in an ordinary working family. His father was employed by the Imperial and Royal Railroad of the Austro-Hungarian government. He was the last of his mother's 9 pregnancies. Out of those 9 babies, only a few grew to maturity. His brother Stephen, who never had good health, and his 3 sisters, Mary, Anne, and Christine, and then Blessed Theodore. He was baptized as George Theodore and was born April 14th, 1911, in the Maramaros Mountains of the Carpathian chain in the village of Veliki Bichkov, in what was then Austria-Hungary. And the Austro-Hungarian Empire at that time occupied Central Europe, and the Carpathian region had been ruled as part of the Kingdom of Hungary for 1,000 years. In 1868, the empire split into Austrian and Hungarian halves, and our church was under the Hungarian part. And in the late 1880s, 1890s, the Hungarian government engaged in a program to Magyarize, or bring into Hungarian language and culture, the German and Slavic minorities living in their part of the empire. And that comes to play in Blessed Theodore's life. He always went by the name Theodore on all of his identity cards, and he used his name as his first name. And it means, of course, gift of God in Greek, certainly a prophetic choice by his parents. The province's historical name where the Eparchy Mukachevo is still based is called Subcarpathian Rus. the Rusin territory or the Rus territory underneath the Carpathians, underneath the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains on the south side of the mountains. And they always looked westward and southward, towards Austria and towards Hungary. And after 1944, when the Soviet Union occupied and then annexed the territory in 1945, they changed the name to what it is now, which is Transcarpathia. And Transcarpathia simply means that now they would look over the mountains, no longer west, but north towards Moscow. And that name still exists today. The main original Slavic population there sees itself as either Rusin or Carpatho-Russian or Carpatho-Ukrainian. In addition, the province has a very large Hungarian minority, as well as it used to have a very big Jewish population in Blessed Theodore's day before the Holocaust, as well as Slovak and Gypsy and German minorities. So in 1646, 63 priests from the Eparchy Mukachevo signed an act of union with Rome. The territory had been evangelized by disciples of St. Cyril and Methodius in the late 800s, and then gradually became part of the Orthodox Church after the split between Rome and Constantinople. And these priests, in signing that act of union in 1646, started the formation of the Byzantine Catholic Church, of which the Metropolia of Pittsburgh is a leading part in, and is the branch in the United States. The Romzha family was Greek Catholic, and since the father was a government employee on the railroad, he had to speak Hungarian, and they spoke Hungarian at home along with their local version of Rusin, the Maramatos dialect. School was taught in Hungarian, and church was served in Old Slavonic. So he was multilingual from the get-go. In World War I, of course, would lead to the destruction of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But when he was born in 1911, really people expected the empire to go on for a very long time. There was no reason to think anything was going to change in Europe. So he was born in the Kingdom of Hungary. At the age of 8, he became a citizen of the Republic of Czechoslovakia. As an adult, he lived in the Carpatho-Ukraine Republic that lasted just for a day. And then in 1939, he was again a citizen now of Hungary without an emperor. And then he died under Soviet rule. So that gives an idea of the rapidity of change that struck this territory that had not had much change for centuries. In his native village, he went to grammar school, graduated early. He did very well and graduated with honors. As a result, he was sent away to study in the town of Hust and as a boarding student in the government school. And there he had to learn Czech. Hungarian was no longer an acceptable language. The Czechoslovak state was now in power, and they wanted people to learn a Slavonic language. Vasilia Popovich went to school with him, and she said he played volleyball and football very well. Football, of course, for them is what we call soccer in North America. He sang well, danced well. He did not shy away from the labor of peasants when he was on vacation in his native village. He always helped his mother and father mowing hay, drying it, piling it into the special wheat stacks. He would weed the corn, the potatoes, and the beans, and he would harvest the crops. On Sundays and holidays, he clearly sang in church. He always chanted the epistles and sang beautifully at the Krylos stand, which is a big wooden stand that the books are on in the front of the church where the cantors are. During the liturgy, his tenor was clearly distinguished from everybody else's voice because it was so clear and beautiful. Alexander Slivka went to school with him, met him, and was his roommate at the Hust boarding school when they were both 17 years old. And he said he was of medium height. He had dark hair, dark black eyes, which shone on you as if they were x-rays, not piercing, but looking at you and understanding you. And that's what I saw in that photograph when I was 13 years old in his face. He always spoke loudly, but didn't raise his voice. He spoke clearly. He loved playing volleyball and soccer. He willingly would engage in debate and was equal to it. To his peers, he always had a friendly attitude. And for the first and second year students, he acted as a big brother to them, even though he was a senior student. Often during breaks between lessons, the younger children would hang around his neck, one hanging on his chest, another on his back, and he would wear them going around the volleyball court like trophies. And that's a characteristic that stayed with him the rest of his life, children being drawn to him and feeling safe and comfortable with him. He came to school speaking Hungarian and Russian. He learned Czech very easily, and then also learned Latin and French. The school teachers at the Hust boarding school thought that he would become an engineer because of his great interest in science. But as an altar server, he had felt a calling to serve God. He wanted to convert people to Christ. He wanted to bring people back to the church who had strayed from it. There was a French Jesuit working in their region who was called Father Charles Bourgeois. And he was one of those first Roman priests who had Byzantine faculties and had graduated from Rome. He worked in Subcarpathian Rus in order to really learn the Byzantine liturgy, because his goal, as was the goal of all the students who came out of the Jesuit-run Rusicum in Rome, was to work for union with the Orthodox and eventually to do missionary work in the Soviet Union. And Father Bourgeois, when he came working in these villages in Matamoros, he also had to bring people back to the faith, people who had left the faith, people who were caught up in communism and socialism. And he inspired Blessed Theodore very much in his vocation. When his parents would read the lives of the saints, he would weep at the parts where martyrs were suffering. He always was a helpful child. He was always willing to help younger children, as we heard from the boarding school, as well as in his home village in Veliki Bichkov. And whenever there was an argument, people went to him for the mediator, because he would always come to a just resolution that everybody would agree on. A talent that also would come to play later in his life. Between his prayerful life, his athletic skills, his language skills, his scholastic abilities, all of this not only struck his teachers and fellow students, all of this comes in to be very important in his life as a priest and his short service as bishop. He asked his father for permission to enter the seminary in 1927 when he was 16 years old, but he wanted to go as a celibate priest, not as a married priest, as was the norm in those days and in that eparchy. His father was not pleased with this because he was the one to carry on the Romzha name. His brother Stephen did not have good health. And so he asked him to go to school, continue his studies, and decide in a few years if he still felt called to priesthood and to celibate priesthood. And he graduated with honors in 1930. And indeed, he went back to his father, and his father agreed that he could go to seminary and study for the priesthood. But Blessed Theodore wanted to go to Rome. He wanted to study in Rome. He wanted to get as good an education as possible, and he wanted to be a good missionary to his own people, and hopefully someday people in the Soviet Union. His family went to Bishop Gebe, and Father Bourgeois interceded for him on his behalf, and Bishop Theodore Gebe agreed to sponsor him. And he went off to Rome and entered the Gregorian University, living at the German and Hungarian College. In 1934, Mr. Romzha lost his job at the same time that Bishop Gebe died, and Blessed Theodore had no financial support. He had already, as we heard, wanted to be a missionary to the Soviet Union, and now he decided to apply to the Rusicum. His father lost his job because the Czechoslovak government was engaged in a campaign to weaken the Catholic Church. The Czechoslovak government was very anti-Catholic because they blamed Rome for having supported the Habsburg Empire for so many centuries. And they believed that Catholicism had held people back. And there was a lot of Orthodox propaganda that had just begun in the territory of the Mukachevo Eparchy shortly before World War I, when there were only 300 Orthodox in the entire eparchy. By 1930, as a result of state support, as a result of the presence of white Russian refugee priests and monks who settled in the area after escaping from the Soviet Union, as a result of people coming back from the United States with stories about how Greek Catholics were not well treated by the Latin Catholic bishops and how they had gotten themselves established in Orthodoxy in America. All of these factors combined so that the Orthodox population had soared to 112,000 people. So Blessed Theodore had missionary work to do right at home. He went to the Rusicum, he was accepted, and he was very much inspired by these men. Some of them were escapees from the Soviet Union. They knew what communism was. Others were like him, like-minded idealists who were hoping that Orthodoxy and Catholicism could be brought back into unity and that they would get into the USSR as missionaries. They were men that were really prepared to die for this ideal, and a large number of them did. They were studying or working in Eastern Poland when the Soviet Union invaded that region in 1939. Others went into the USSR at different times, and all of them were caught. All of them went to the Gulag, and some of them were shot. And one of his fellow students wrote, Theodore was willing to do missionary work in Russia in order to be able to do more for Christ. He was ready to sacrifice himself and unite himself with the blood of Christ. How quickly his wish ended up being fulfilled in a way, of course, that no one anticipated. The conditions of training that were required of the students were very hard and very strict. They had to adhere to the rule at all times. They had to wear their black cassock even in the hot Roman sun. Theodore was the youngest student at the time that he entered in 1934. You could only leave the house in the company of one or more other students. You could never go alone. You had to return within 6 hours. The doors were closed at a certain time, and if you were not in, you could be expelled. If you went to the movies or you went to a cafe, you could be expelled. If you attended theater, you could be expelled. Everything was to be focused totally on the work at hand, to study for the priesthood, to study communism and atheist philosophy, to be able to answer the debate of communists and atheists, and to be prepared to work hard and to live as a laborer, working among the people in the Soviet Union. At Christmas in 1935, he was ordained a deacon. And a year later, on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve in 1936, he was ordained a priest at St. Anthony Abate Church. If you're following slides along at home, you should be looking now at the picture of the Rusicum and the picture of the chapel. Now we're looking at Uzhhorod, I see, on the main computer. So this is what he was going to go home to. In 1937, he was called to his degree of his licentiate at the Gregorian University with magna cum laude. And he's called back home to Czechoslovakia. This is the Cathedral of the Holy Cross and the residence of the bishop. The bishop's residence isn't just a house for the bishop, all those rooms there. It was the eparchial library, the archives. There were offices there for the curia. There was all kinds of activities happening in that multi-story residence. And then the cathedral, it became a model for a lot of parish churches in the United States, especially St. John the Baptist Church in Munhall, Pennsylvania. And this is where he comes back in 1937 as a priest. Bishop Stoika asks him to come home. He has to do his military duty for the Republic of Czechoslovakia, and he has to go to Prague in order to take a one-year course. That was difficult for him because, as I said, the government was hostile to Catholics, and especially Greek Catholics. And here he is, a Greek Catholic priest. He had a hard time finding opportunities to celebrate the liturgy. And he was often under officers who were very anti-Catholic. He had a difficult experience. The political situation was also very dangerous then. Hitler was in power in Germany and had his eyes on Austria and had his eyes on the German-speaking territories of Czechoslovakia. So times were tense and difficult. Instead of going back to Rome, he now is sent off by Bishop Alexander Stoika to the villages of Berezovo in the Lower Bistry district of Hust. This map shows Czechoslovakia as it existed at the time. The red box is the territory of the Eparchy of Mukachevo. Užhorod is right at the edge of that red line. This was the Czechoslovak Republic until 1938. The German territories were all around the north and the west of Czechoslovakia. And then all along the south were Hungarian-speaking territories. And all of these come to play in our story. This is San Antonio Abate, and now this is the Church of Our Lady at Nizhny Bistry. When he arrived at his parish assignment in the Maramush region, you see the mountains up behind him. The church had only 130 parishioners in a district that had 2,500 Orthodox. In addition, there were a lot of communists. Some of the communists came to church because they were not atheists, but people that wanted social reform. They wanted land reform. They wanted political change in Czechoslovakia. There had been very successful Orthodox propaganda here. Religious knowledge was very poor in this region. People were very superstitious. Here he comes with his Roman degree and is sent to one of the poorest, most remote places, not far from his home, but it could have been very far because all he had to get around with was a bicycle, not even a horse. There were Catholics, Greek Catholics living in two different locations, so he had to offer two of everything, 2 Vespers, 2 Matins, 2 liturgies. He wrote to Rome that when he got there, the conditions of the church were as poor as the spiritual knowledge of the people. He had to order new altar linens and new vestments. After he got the altar properly taken care of, then he got the church interiors redecorated because they were in bad need of updating. And only after that did he get the rectory fixed up so that he could live in better conditions. Very unusual for the time. He actually met with the local Orthodox priests and visited with them at a time when Greek Catholics and Orthodox were so hostile to one another. When I went to this location, the people outside of the ruined church told me that there had never been any Catholics in this village. It was always an Orthodox church. The church was in total ruin because after his assassination, the communists desecrated the interior and would not allow anybody to have religious services there. But I met a woman walking down the hillside. We asked her, did she want to ride? She did indeed. As she gets in the car, it turns out in her purse, she had all the paperwork for this very church to be reopened and to be restored for Greek Catholic use. She was the daughter of a priest who had been ordained by Blessed Theodore. And her father had never been caught by the communists when he was doing underground work. And they said it was because he always prayed to Blessed Theodore when he set out. And when the police would come and search their house, they never found any of the incriminating evidence, such as chalices, investments, and books. They never found anything. And she said, my mother said it was because of Blessed Theodore's protection over us. So this woman had been walking downhill every Sunday for 1 hour to get to a bus stop, riding the bus for 1 hour, then walking 30 minutes in order to go to church, and then repeating it to go home every week rather than go to the Orthodox Church. And because of her dedication, now that location is finally being used again by the Greek Catholic Church. In 1938, things become very difficult in Central Europe. Austria is annexed to the Third Reich in March. On September 22nd, Czechoslovakia declares a general mobilization of all the men to report for army duty. Father Romzha is again called up. The borders are closed. Passports are invalid. He's told you will never get back to Rome now. The Munich Conference was called, and in the Munich Conference, Great Britain and France agreed that Hitler would annex the German-speaking territories of Czechoslovakia. And then in November, another agreement was passed in Vienna, whereby Hungary re-annexed all the Hungarian-speaking districts. This is the red line through your map. And you'll see the town of Uzhhorod, where the bishop lived, now is in Hungary. But Father Romzha is far to the east and cannot communicate with his bishop. Everything is cut off. And they had to live with this very difficult situation because of these awards. In March 1939, Czechoslovakia is dissolved. The eparchy is reunited under Hungarian rule. Slovakia becomes a quasi-independent state, and the Czech lands become a protectorate under Hitler. Hitler declares that he has no more demands on Europe and there will be peace. And everybody in the West hoped he was telling the truth, which of course we knew he was not. Bishop Alexander Stoika now is able to meet up again with Father Romzha. And in the summer of 1939, he surprises Father Romzha by naming him the spiritual director of the seminary. He was extremely surprised at this because he was so young and didn't think he should be the spiritual director because of his youth and given the critical time that the church was facing under these difficult circumstances. There was war on the horizon. There is great tension among the older priests who were pro-Hungarian and the younger priests who were more Slav-oriented. There were priests who couldn't even preach or hear confessions in Russian dialects. And in the middle of all of this tension, there's also the communists, socialists, and Orthodox propaganda still taking place. But he was obedient, and in August, he goes to Uzhhorod and begins to prepare for the school year and his new responsibilities. On September the 1st, Hitler invades Poland, and World War II breaks out. On September the 17th, the Soviet Union invades Poland from the east. And by this, they are now on the border of Subcarpathian Rus. Their army is now only 60 kilometers from Uzhhorod. And in one of the last letters that Father Romzha was able to send to Rome, he wrote, "The Soviets have now come to me. I will not run away. The borders have moved towards me so that I might become a missionary." And then he wrote this in all capital letters: "To die for Christ is to live forever." This became his motto, and he would use this sentence later as a bishop in encouraging people to hold fast to the Greek Catholic faith under persecution. The Soviet occupation of eastern Poland launched religious persecution, the deportation of 1.5 million people to Siberia, Collectivization of Agriculture. In early 1941, Father Romzha helped one of his fellow students, Father Jan Kellner, to cross that new border to try and do missionary work. But he was instantly betrayed and turned into the Soviets. And after intense interrogation, he was shot. At the same time, there were idealistic young people from Subcarpathian Rus who said, now we're going to go and live in the socialist paradise. And all of them were arrested and as spies because the Soviets thought anyone who would willingly come to their country had to be out of their minds or a spy. And all of those young people were taken away and sent to Siberia into the Gulag, where most of them died. His old friend, Father Bourgeois, was now working in Estonia, which came under Soviet occupation as well. And he lost touch with him. And all this time, Father Romzha is giving spiritual advice to the students, over 80 young men, and teaching. He was assigned to teach philosophy, but he also decided he needs to teach communist philosophy because of the Soviet Union being at their doorstep. He impressed the seminarians very much. I heard from priests who were ordained by him in the late 1940s, several different characteristics. One was he was very punctual. He learned that in the German college in Rome. And being half German, I have to say that that is most definitely a German habit, to be on time for everything. He also celebrated the liturgy very devoutly and very carefully. It was a time when some priests shortened services. He celebrated everything according to the book, but they said when you saw his face during the anaphora, especially during the epiclesis, the prayer to the Holy Spirit, after the words of consecration are said, that his entire face would be transformed in every single liturgy. He was very devoted to Our Lady. He had great devotion to Mary. He believed very much in the messages of Our Lady of Fatima. And because of that, and Our Lady warning Europe in 1917 that if people did not repent, Russia would spread its errors throughout the world, he made a point of teaching about the message of Fatima, the need for penance, the need for prayer, the need for conversion. He always said the rosary every day. He never went a day without saying the rosary. And he dedicated his students to the protection of Our Lady. He made a point of playing sports with the seminarians. As I said, he was a very good athlete. He would take off his cassock. He would play football alongside them. He would play volleyball alongside them. He would take them on hikes. He would take them skiing up in the mountains and use the sports as a chance to sit with them casually, be able to talk about life's issues in a very informal setting. Very much the style of St. John Paul II, what he would be doing in Poland after his ordination. He always kept his sense of humor. He wanted the young men not to feel overwhelmed. And he made a point of making jokes and trying to get them to laugh at themselves and to understand human nature, not to be overly strict with the people or themselves. At one occasion on the feast of St. Nicholas, they had a big dinner in honor of St. Nicholas, and unfortunately there was a lot of drinking, and one seminarian drank a little too much. Well, if you got drunk, you could be thrown out of the seminary. And Father Romzha interceded and said, no, it's because he had dental work today. That's really what's wrong with him. And in fact, that seminarian was ordained a priest by him and later led a heroic life of sacrifice and loyalty to the Greek Catholic Church under communist oppression. He refused to seek higher appointments. Celibate priests in the Greek Catholic Church were very few. Bishops came from among the monks or the few celibate secular priests. He didn't become celibate in order to advance himself. He was celibate out of imitation of Christ and in order to serve Christ better. So he was very angry with priests who would try and angle their way into what they thought was a good parish, a big parish, and influential positions. Even though he was celibate, he was always willing to help the young men look for the right kind of girl to marry. When there were dances with girls from the teachers' college, many of whom were daughters of priests or granddaughters of priests, he would point out certain ones to them and say, now look, this could be somebody you might consider. And later on, as a bishop, he would sit with them and talk with both the man and the woman about the dangers they were facing, so that both of them would go in with their eyes wide open of how difficult married priesthood was going to be for them under the communists. There were some priests who wanted to switch to the Latin Rite and go and do missionary work abroad. And he told them, no, stay with your own church. We have enough missionary work to do here. The Soviets are so close, and look at the people who have left the church. So he got them to stay. And he was very popular throughout the eparchy to go around to do missions, giving sermons for several days in a row, hearing confessions. He made a point of giving spiritual conferences for teachers, spiritual conferences for the educated classes, for university graduates, so that they would stay with the church. He would give missions to peasants and missions to people with master's degrees. And in 1941, Pope Pius XII named him a member of the papal household, which gave him the title of Monsignor, which everybody thought he would be very happy about. And he was not happy about it at all. He thought that was a great embarrassment. The priests that I met told me that if you knew Romzha, then you had met Jesus Christ. A tremendous legacy for any priest and certainly any bishop to leave behind. And every single priest I met who was ordained by him or went to school under him and was ordained later in the underground, they all said it independently. And Bishop Ivan Semedy, who was ordained by him and consecrated a bishop in the underground, he told me the same thing, that without his leadership and his example, the Greek Catholic Church would have collapsed under the weight of Soviet persecution. Bishop Stoika was developing poor health, and in 1943, he died very suddenly and unexpectedly. The Hungarian government wanted to take this opportunity to push their own candidate forward for bishop. Rome knew that things were very dangerous. Hungary had joined the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. And that meant as the Red Army was moving westward, Hungary was going to be invaded. And nobody knew what the Russians were going to do once they got to the Carpathian Mountains. And so the Hungarian government proposed 3 different candidates, and Rome rejected all of them. And the papal nuncio in Budapest went up and interviewed the priests to get an idea, and they made the surprise announcement that they were going to first have the Bishop of Hajdú-Dorog serve as temporary administrator of the eparchy in December 11th, 1943. At this point, there were 852,000 people living in Subcarpathian Rus, of whom 113,000 were Jews. Of those, only 10,000 would survive the Holocaust, either by being hidden locally by peasants or because they survived Auschwitz. Of the rest of the population, 462,000 were Greek Catholic, 82,000 were Latin Catholic, about 20,000 were Protestant, mostly Hungarian Reformed. So half the population of Greek Catholics and Latin Catholics would become the responsibility of this new bishop. The Orthodox Church then had about 110,000 faithful in 73 parishes. The Greek Catholics had 281 parishes and over 400 churches and chapels, with 354 priests, 85 men in seminary, 31 grammar schools run by the church, and 85 monks and sisters. On the September the 8th, 1944, the priests of the chapter the gathering of priests that helped the bishop run an eparchy, were called to come into the office in Usharad, and Father Romzha was told to wait outside. He thought he was in trouble. Instead, when he went inside, they handed him the papal letter nominating him as Bishop of Mukachevo. He was consecrated bishop on the feast of the Holy Cross, and took as his motto, "The Lord is my fortress and my refuge," the verse that we recite in the Divine Liturgy as priests. Rome chose him because he had the experience of dealing with the communists, because he knew how to work with intellectuals who were going to be targeted by the communists, because he had a very good spiritual reputation and he had not been involved in any politics. Many of the priests have been involved in politics, either as in the Hungarian parliament or the Czechoslovakian parliament, and those priests would be in trouble with the communists. He could not even be ordained in the church. He had to be consecrated in the crypt because of air raids being conducted by the Soviets. And the Germans were evacuating. The Hungarian army was retreating. They were going to force the civilian population into treks and have them all leave the territory. And he went to the German commanders and interceded for them, one of his first duties as bishop, and he convinced them to leave the people in their homes. This was fortunate because the treks were subjected to air attacks, and when the Red Army was close to them, they were also subjected to slaughter at the hands of the Red Army. So these people were spared a terrible fate. The city fell on the 27th of October after the Germans blew up the bridges. There was very little resistance in the city. There was very little trouble from the Red Army. Within 3 years, 117 of the Greek Catholic priests would leave the eparchy, some of them with permission, some of them without permission. Some of them Bishop Romzha told they should go and escape to the west because he knew they would be either because of their past being very vocally anti-communist, or he didn't think they could hold up under the persecution. The Czechoslovak government in exile sent a delegation that came to reorganize the province and be restored to Czechoslovak rule. But what was not known to the delegation or to the people was that the government in exile had signed a secret agreement with Stalin. Stalin wanted the province because of the mountain passes. And so they would have access through those mountain passes into the plains, which indeed Stalin used in 1950s in order to send the Red Army into Hungary. The government informed Blessed Theodore that he was to go to a special assembly that was being held to thank the great Stalin for liberation and to announce that he was asking the great Stalin to unite them with their ancestral homeland, Ukraine, which of course doesn't really work since they'd never been part of Ukraine. And he said, "I'll write my own speech." He gave a very short speech thanking the Soviet Union for liberation from German occupation and saying that now they look forward to a peaceful life in Czechoslovakia. The next day, the newspapers announced that Bishop Theodore had instead asked for reunification with the Soviet Union. He went to the government and said, "I never said that." And they said, "No, we printed what you should have said." And that was his first experience with how the communists were going to do things. In October of 1945, the Moscow Patriarchate sent a bishop to organize the reunion of the Greek Catholics with Moscow. Again, Greek Catholic Church had never been part of Moscow even during the Orthodox phase, but that was the new line of the government. He had to now instruct the priests as to what to do. They had to memorize the liturgy. They had to hide as much as possible the church registers so they could not be used against people for sacraments that people had received. They had to hide books and chalices with trustworthy parishioners. Great pressure was put on the people to become Orthodox. The Russian Orthodox Church was cooperating with Stalin, and the Orthodox Church wanted the Greek Catholic Church to be totally submerged into it. And once and for all, there be an end to Eastern Catholicism in Eastern Europe. New laws were passed that if 2/3 of the people in the parish signed, then a church could become Orthodox. Unfortunately, people were forced to sign papers that were blank, and then those papers were used to prove, so to speak, that the people really wanted to be Orthodox and didn't want to be Greek Catholic. The government took his car away, but that didn't stop him. He went out by horse, he went out by cart, he went out on foot, he went out on public bus, visiting every single church and chapel. And in villages where they had lost the church, then they would meet at a private home or in the cemetery. What they would do would be this: Bishop Romzha would lead the entire congregation at the end of the liturgy through their baptismal vows to renounce Satan and to accept Jesus Christ. And at the end, to take a special vow to remain faithful to the Greek Catholic Church until death. And at the end of every sermon, he gave the same sentence: to die for Christ is to live forever. And this he himself ended up doing. The persecution was worsening, the pressures were intense, and in 1947, on August 28th, in spite of all that pressure, 83,000 people showed up in Mukachevo for the annual pilgrimage at the monastery of St. Nicholas, of whom 3,000 were Orthodox, expecting to hear that the church was going to become Orthodox. Bishop Romzha was not allowed to go to the monastery. 80,000 people pushed their way through police lines to go to the pro-cathedral where the bishop was waiting for them. And this was the last big public demonstration of the Greek Catholic Church. A report was sent to Stalin that he had to be removed, or else they would never be able to break the loyalty of the Transcarpathian people to the Pope in Rome. False report was sent to Stalin claiming that Bishop Romzha was in league with partisans that were fighting against the communists in Western Ukraine, and also that he had been holding meetings with emissaries from the Vatican. None of this was true. Nobody could get to Transcarpathia. The borders were all sealed. But Stalin agreed that he should be killed. And so arrangements were made for him to be ambushed and murdered. On October 25th, 1947, he was given permission right away when he asked for it to leave Uzhhorod and go and celebrate the liturgy in a church that had its iconostas redecorated. At this stage, in 1947, it was very difficult for him to get permission to leave Uzhhorod. It was very, very hard. And he had already heard on the radio that he was dead, that he had been murdered by anti-communist partisans. So foreign radio broadcasts had already been fed this information by the communists. So everybody around him knew things were very bad and very dangerous. And they went out. He told the priests and seminarians he would not order anyone to go with him because it was so dangerous. 2 seminarians volunteered to go, along with Father Daniel Baczynski Jr. And these 3 accompanied him. They went by bus. They were met at Ivanoce with a carriage, went to the village of Lachovo, and then had the special celebration in Lavki. As was the practice, everyone renewed their baptismal promises. The people came and warned him that there were U.S. Army trucks that had been sent to the Soviets to fight the Nazis outside the village, and strange men. The young men slept with their arms tied together around the rectory to protect him. He decided that he was going to go home. He headed out, and as he was saying the rosary, a truck appeared behind the carriage, sped up, swerved into them, and destroyed the carriage and hit with such force that the horses were killed. Men got out with metal rods and brass knuckles, beating everybody into unconsciousness. They would have killed them, except, very unusual circumstance, the mail truck showed up. Never went on that road at that time of day, just happened to be extremely early. And at this, the Red Army soldiers fled. He is taken off to Mukachevo, to the city hospital, where our sisters were still allowed to work, although it was now run by the government, and there was a communist in charge, Dr. Bergman. Successful surgery was done on him, but he had to have his jaws wired shut because his jaws had been broken and his ribs had been broken. They had beaten him so severely. He was put in a room with Father Baczynski, who was in a coma. Word was sent to Stalin that Romzha had survived the attack. And so Stalin sent poison. Dr. Bergman brought a woman called Odarka, claimed she was a partisan. The sisters could see through this facade. And on the night of October 31st, Odarka was intruded into the bishop's room, and Sister Theophilia, who had made it her duty to stay with the bishop at all times, was forced out. The sisters were gone for merely 5 minutes. When they came back in, they said, "Thank God, the bishop's all right." But Father Baczynski had come out of his coma, and he told them that he saw Odarka put a cloth up to Romzha's nose, and he struggled against her, saying, "Don't, don't." With this, the nuns go to him and called for the other doctors to come to their assistance. He said to them, "Jesus, oh Jesus," and then said, "Put me on the ground." In the old funeral rite, priests died on the ground, and it was also the practice in Matamoros for people to die on the ground. They laid him on the floor, his body went into spasms, and he died. When the doctor picked up the phone to make a report that Bishop Romzha had been murdered, he heard Dr. Bergman saying to someone on the line, "The deed is done, he is dead." He hung up the phone very quietly. This is Bishop Romzha visiting up in the mountains, disguised as a layman. After this trip, he shaved off his famous beard. He was the only Greek Catholic clergyman who had a beard. Beards were a sign of orthodoxy, and people thought he had become Orthodox and started this rumor that he had converted. And so after this, he shaved off his beard. The difference was so profound that the altar servers in the cathedral would not let him vest until they heard him speak to them, because they believed it was a priest interfering with the bishop's vestments. This is Bishop Romzha in his casket. The vestments he was buried in are red. You're supposed to be buried in white vestments as a sign of the resurrection. The communists went to the priests, led by Monsignor Hira, and said, "You have to vest him in white. Don't you believe in the resurrection?" And they said, "We vest him in red because he was a martyr." They said, "No, he wasn't a martyr. He was killed by partisans." And they stuck to their guns and would not yield. And thousands and thousands of people came through the cathedral until the funeral services were held. At the end of the liturgy, the seminarians and young priests carried him down into the crypt, and he was buried down there. The crypt doors were closed, and then they began 2 years of struggle until the middle of 1949. The government informed Monsignor Hira, who had secretly been consecrated as a bishop, but they did not know this, that your Greek Catholic Church no longer exists. You are all now Orthodox. And this was the final campaign in which priests were pressured to convert. Very few converted willingly. Those who converted either signed to become Orthodox and then never offered sacraments again for anyone outside of their family, or signed because their parishioners begged them to, because they did not want Russian priests brought into their parish who they could not know or trust. And the other priests who refused to sign, ultimately all were arrested and sentenced to terms in the Gulag for as long as 25 years. Sister Theophilia was arrested and charged with the murder of Bishop Romzha, that she had collaborated with Odarka in killing him. In prison, she was tortured to force her to confess to this false crime so terribly And she was in such great fear. They enclosed her in a metal box that she could not see or hear out of. But in that box, she had a dream in which he appeared to her and told her that she was to live and testify about his death. And she did survive the torture. She was exiled to the Arctic. They tried to kill her repeatedly in the Arctic, but she survived. Stalin died in 1953. The surviving Greek Catholics in the Gulag were slowly released and sent home. She was released, weighed only 68 pounds, and was carried in a stretcher because she was so incredibly weak. But she had survived. Saint John Chrysostom wrote, "The church never ceases to be attacked, but it wins. The stronger the attacks, the more it grows. Waves break upon her. The rock is motionless. Those who attack the church will lose themselves. The church will become even stronger. He who attacks it destroys his own strength." St. Theodore the Studite wrote, "From all ages, those who attack the church vanish like the foam of the sea, and she, like an enduring rock, is the same faith." The Greek Catholic Church had to go completely underground. You can order my book, Finding a Hidden Church, from Eastern Christian Publications, and you can read about how the church did that, inspired by Romzha. As I said over and over, people told me without his inspiration, there would be no Greek Catholic Church. At the end of 1989, Gorbachev met with St. John Paul II in Rome, and the Pope said, "I want all the Eastern Catholic churches to be restored in the Soviet Union." And Gorbachev agreed. Public services could be held. The Orthodox in Transcarpathia really expected a few thousand people. Instead, there were over 300,000 people who came out of the catacombs after 50 years of unrelenting persecution and anti-Greek Catholic propaganda. It was an amazing testimony to the power of one man's witness, and an amazing testimony of how the church, no matter what she faces, always is triumphant. The only Catholic church that was left open in Moscow was St. Louis of the French, and it was right next door to the KGB headquarters, unfortunately. But they had a big banner quoting the words of Jesus to Peter, "Upon this rock you shall build my church." As St. Theodore said, the rock of the church endures. And the greatest testimony of Blessed Theodore's legacy is the continued survival of the Greek Catholic Church in Transcarpathia today, and the fact that it is a living church, a strong church, a flourishing church. Thanks an awful lot for tuning in tonight. If you have questions, Deacon Beza will pass them on now.
Wow, thank you so much, Father. So the first question that we have is, what is his current state for canonization for sainthood?
He was beatified in 2001 by St. John Paul II in Ukraine. Now he needs a miracle. He was beatified because it was proven he was killed in hatred of the faith. The difficulty with all the martyrs under communism is they were all arrested on political charges. So the church has to prove that they were killed out of hatred for the faith. So now he needs a miracle. So if you know someone who's seriously ill, who needs a miracle, pray to him, because he needs that miracle in order to become a saint.
Yeah, absolutely. During the communists, what was the sort of state with the Russian Orthodox Church? How did the Patriarchate work with or against the Orthodox Church? What's the history there?
The Patriarchate, unfortunately, worked pretty much hand in glove with the Soviet state. That was their trade-off. The deal was, during World War II, Stalin allowed the Patriarchate to be restored. Out of nearly 300 bishops alive in 1917, they could find only 12 who were still alive.
Wow.
The church had endured great persecution. and thousands of priests, monks, and nuns and lay people had been killed during those persecutions. The trade-off was this: the Orthodox Church could have a seminary, a printing press with a limited run of a magazine, and they could open churches in certain places. In exchange, they had to give complete loyalty to the Soviet state, and in all foreign settings proclaim that there was no religious persecution in the USSR, even though there very much was. And there were still many Orthodox who were being persecuted. When an Orthodox priest or layperson, though, was persecuted, the Russian Orthodox Church would not intervene for them, would not even send priests to take sacraments to them in prison. They were all on their own. So it was a deal with the devil, and a deal that was not a good one in the long run.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, wasn't Stalin a seminarian at one point? I mean,
Stalin was a seminarian, but the seminary in Georgia was pretty bad. They were Russian priests brought into Georgia. They didn't speak Georgian. Many of them were socialists. He didn't get a very good religious education. His mother died an Orthodox Christian, and she specified that she wanted a Christian burial. He wouldn't give it to her, but he did allow her to be buried in an Orthodox cemetery. So he gave her that.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Father, this is obviously a great passion of yours. What's your story with Blessed Theodore?
Well, when I went over there, I went to, because I had great devotion to him. I introduced, when the prayer for his beatification was first published, we started saying it in our parish, and we still say it in our parish. And we have a stained glass window of him in our parish church, and we have a big icon of him in the church that was made for me by somebody because they knew how much I prayed to him. I used to have these huge, heavy plastic braces from my elbows to my fingers to hold my hands in place. And on my last visit, I knelt at his grave. He's buried under glass. You can show that, in fact, one of the processions of his casket. He's buried under glass. He's not incorrupt. It's his skeleton that's under the glass. But I knelt at that, and I said to him, if you want me to write this book, you got to heal my hands.
Yeah.
And I came home from that trip, and I was sick and went to the hospital, and the doctor sent me for physical therapy afterwards. And the therapist said, you don't need these things on your hands anymore. Your hands are fine. What happened?
Oh, wow.
So I said, well, Romzha happened.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a passion. He is a big passion of mine. And
Yeah.
It's very important to me.
With these icons that you took, where do they come from? A couple of people have commented to me about how beautiful they are. Where did you get the pictures
that are used in the slides?
Yes. Yep.
They sent them to me from the seminary, so I have them on my computer. A lot of them. Some you can find on the internet.
Yeah.
A few are on the internet that you can find today. People sent some to me in the mail. If you go to the Mission Baronyevo site, the Mission Society website, you can see some of the pictures when his body was returned. His body, they had to identify his body for the canonization proceedings after he was beatified, and the Orthodox had dumped all the bodies out of the tombs in the crypt. So they had to find Bishop Romzha's body. And so when they sent it to Budapest for study to prove that these were indeed his remains. And then there was this big procession for a couple of months in the year 2003, and they were carried in that glass casket across Hungary and Eastern Slovakia, and then over the border to the seminary, and then to the cathedral where it is now today. So that's what some of the pictures are.
Absolutely. And is it possible to get his relics, perhaps as parishes? Is it possible to get relics for veneration here in the States?
That's a good question, actually. They gave out hairs from his head sealed in holy cards. So there was only a certain number of those that were given out. I really don't know. I'll have to check on that and see what the office says in Uzhhorod.
Yeah, it seems to be a great interest as for veneration. I'm envisioning maybe at our parishes and things.
Right.
The next question. Well, I'll get one more. An additional question would be, because his feast is Monday. For us. How would you recommend or counsel that we as Greek Catholics here in the States, how can we sort of celebrate his that feast day? Is there anything that you would recommend, or maybe something we should read or reflect on?
You can get this book. Right? Does this show up? There it goes.
Yep. And I'll post a link. Yep.
All right. Theodore Romzha, His Life, Times and Martyrdom. The English is a little rough. The translation is a little rough, but it's a very good book. It's written by the son of the priest who was the rector of the cathedral at the time of the funeral. And you can get it from the same company that my book is at, Eastern Christian Publications. And you can get that book, read it. Obviously, go to church. There is a moleben to him. I don't know if it's on the Metropolitan Cantor Institute website.
No, I haven't seen it. I actually specifically looked in preparation for tonight.
Oh, okay. There is a moleben. I'll try and find a source for that, okay. That you could post on the site. It's the best way to celebrate him is to be a missionary. Talk about him and the fact that he sincerely believed, that to die for Christ is to live forever. And that as Catholics, we believe that. As Christians, we believe that. Bring someone to church. Bring someone to your parish next Sunday. Invite them. Be a missionary. Be proud of your church. A lot of us have come into the church through conversion or transfer of right. We appreciate the great gift. People living in the Western United States, many people drive great distances to get to church. We're blessed to have this church. Celebrate it. Spread the news about it. To me, that would be the best way to celebrate his life and his cause.
Absolutely. Father, our last question is, are you planning, or what would it take for us to plan a pilgrimage to the cathedral in Mukashevo?
The late Father West had every intention of getting one going. I'm sad to say. He didn't get to go back. I can't go anymore. My health isn't good enough. I can't manage that kind of a trip. I have trouble flying home to New York, let alone fly to Europe.
Well, maybe we could Skype you into when we're at the site.
Yeah, you could Skype me in. Yeah, fuse me in somehow. But there are people who are interested in that. That's something we can pursue, maybe with some of the priests who live now in our eparchy, who are from that area. And they could guide us as to how to go about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really good idea, though, because then you see where our church comes from. You see it living, not in pictures of, peasants in hay fields. You see people that are going to university, people who go to work, people who still make great sacrifices to go to church. That have to go distance to get to church. You could go to the seminary, very, very enthusiastic men studying at the seminary, which is named for Blessed Theodore Romzha. Young men there that are really inspired, men that every time I came back, one of my sisters said, every time you come back from there, you come back even stronger in your priesthood and as a Catholic than you were the year before. And that says a lot for the spiritual experiences I would have over there. So yeah, it's awesome to go. It's really, really great to be able to go there.
Wonderful. I just got an email that there is a Moleben for Blessed Theodore on the MCI site. I will find that and I will send it out to everyone, hopefully tonight
Good.
or early tomorrow. So
Yeah, it's a good service. It's a good prayer service. I keep it in my room and I say it a lot.
Wonderful. And then we just had a question about how to purchase your book. Are all of your books through Eastern Catholic, Eastern Christian publications?
Both of those books are from Eastern Christian publications. Yeah. And they're both still in, I'm sorry, both the Romzha book and Finding a Hidden Church are available from Eastern Christian publications. My first book, my first book called The Forgotten, about Catholics in the Soviet Union from Lenin through Stalin, which also deals with Romzha a little bit. That's out of print, but you can find used copies on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Might even find a new copy. Might be a couple new ones still floating there. But Eastern Christian Publications has the Romzha book and Finding a Hidden Church.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Father. Those are all the questions that we have. Could you close us in prayer, and then we'll sign off?
May Christ, our true God, have mercy on us and save us through the prayers of his most pure mother, by the power of the honorable, holy, and life-giving cross, through the prayers of our holy Bishop Martyr Theodore, and through the prayers of all the saints, for Christ is good, and he loves us all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, thank you
you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you, Father.